Started with this multi-beam session. So session 3 presentations about multi-beam sonar systems. So starting out, we have Shannon Hoy from NOAA with a presentation of lessons learned from successful integration of the EM304 and Mark II variant multi-beam sonar.
Okay, and I'll start trying to share my screen here. So
Thanks,
hopefully
Kevin.
This is coming through.
Yeah, and Kevin and I are going to tag team this, so we'll be swapping off in the middle. But yeah, good morning and afternoon, everybody. I'm Shannon Hoy, an expedition coordinator with NOAA Ocean Exploration. And just as Lee said, today, Kevin and I are going to be presenting on the lessons learned from successful integration of the new Kongsberg EM304 Mark II variant multi-beam sonar on the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer. Next slide, Kevin. So a little bit about NOAA Ocean Exploration. NOAA Ocean Exploration is the United States' only federal organization dedicated to exploring our largely unknown ocean, specifically in waters deeper than 200 meters. And exploration is a bit different than other missions typically carried out at sea. So while most expeditions seek to collect information in support of a specific hypothesis, exploration data is collected more for the purpose to drive the generation of hypotheses. Exploration data is collected for this purpose, and then we also strive to fill the gaps in basic understandings of U.S. deep waters. Though we are the only federal organization dedicated to ocean exploration, we are definitely not the only ones out there exploring. And there are others such as Ocean Exploration Trust, Schmidt Ocean Institute, and OceanX. And then to explore the ocean, we use the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer and conduct generally 3 types of cruises. The first is going to be a solely mapping focused expedition, and then another will be a combination of mapping and ROV dive exploration, and then the third will be technology demonstrations. Something exciting about all of our expeditions is that we employ telepresence technology to connect with scientists ashore to optimize the use of our sea time as we bring ocean exploration to the public. And then this year, we did expand our mapping operations to include remote cloud processing in an effort to reduce berths at sea due to the challenging pandemic conditions. So just a little overview of our mapping systems history. The Okeanos Explorer was equipped in 2007 with the Kongsberg EM302, which excitingly was serial number 1, so that's fun. That remained unchanged until the end of 2008 when that receive array was replaced. And then during the winter of 2019, the topside unit was upgraded to the new EM304. And then we were fortunate enough to actually squeeze in the sea acceptance testing prior to expeditions being paused. And then actually the next time we sailed, we were out to perform the sea acceptance testing of the first, or one of the first EM304 Mark II variant transmits arrays. And then this past field season, we did perform multiple expeditions with the completed upgrade system with both the topside unit and the transmit array.
So I'll take over a couple slides here. So again, I'm Kevin Jerram. I work with the University of New Hampshire Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping and the Multibeam Advisory Committee. But outside of the MAC, I also work with some other platforms, some NOAA vessels, and I've been lucky enough to work with the Okeanos Explorer for the last 5 years or so with some mapping cruises and some testing. And so I was lucky to be involved with this sea acceptance test for the EM304 Mark I and the Mark II. And this past year, we started that process with a whole new survey of the vessel. And this is fundamental to any multi-beam survey or any multi-beam system. So we had the good luck to work with the original surveyor out of Seattle. They had first worked with the boat in 2007, and then they were able to do 2 complete surveys of the ship over the EM304 Mark II installation period. And they actually did 2 surveys because the first one didn't line up exactly. I mean, we were talking about a couple millimeters off from the second survey. So they just said, let's do the whole thing again. And what I liked about that was they were very proactive in not only the survey, but the reporting. And we had feedback and a good dialogue with the company about their reporting format. They followed the MAC recommendations. And the net result is that we could configure the sensors directly from the survey report. And that's not just the multi-beam, that's other sensors on board too. So this is bigger than just the multibeam and mapping systems on board. The results at sea were that the GAMS baseline, antenna baseline calibration basically agreed with the survey very nicely. The patch test results were almost zero, suggesting no major residuals between these configurations. The report feels like it's ready to be in service for the next 10 plus years. It's a really nice foundation for the next service life of this system. And I want to also acknowledge Dr. Anand Hiroji from USM has done extensive work in this area. We've been lucky to work with him on Sally Ride as well. And he just presented a case study about the Nautilus and their vessel geometry at US Hydro. So I think the takeaway I want to share from this slide and our experience with the Okeanos is that the extra effort and time that goes into a good survey, those costs are really small compared to the costs of collecting compromised data when you have either a survey that's not as great as you would hope, or even the reporting format is not quite clear enough. Of course, when you do a survey in dry dock, you don't have a good waterline assessment. We did some dockside testing to establish waterline in the mapping system reference frame, which is nice. It separates that from the historic markings on the vessel, like the draft marks. This gives you kind of a repeatable process that you can go through if the vessel loading changes. This is an area of perpetual ambiguity for a lot of ships. We tend to set it and forget it. And in deep water that works, but not always in shallow water. We might put together a worksheet or some sort of guide for this process that could be adapted for other vessels. So some of the other lessons learned from this experience, we followed the standard sea acceptance testing checklist that the MAC has been developing and following Kongsberg recommendations. So the Kongsberg acceptance testing contract is kind of like a subset of those tests. In the case of the Okeanos, the key here was really having ample time to plan, having time dockside to review the vessel geometry, the configuration, do the waterline testing. And then we had lots of time at sea, which is a luxury, but that let us work around the troubleshooting of the new system and sea state, of course. So we followed the standard checklist of geometry review, GAMS calibration, patch test, do some noise testing, make sure that the new hardware is not acting up or perceiving new sources of noise, do coverage testing, accuracy, and then we get into backscatter normalization. This is a correction for, this is a lengthy set of data collection exercises to help understand the hardware level biases in the backscatter response. So early in the life cycle is the ideal time to do that. Not only do you get better backscatter products, but you then can use that as the backscatter response is a nice way to track hardware health over the service life of the system. And these backscatter products are becoming more of a standard deliverable. So again, I mentioned the noise testing. You can see here we have historic noise data from the 302, the 304 Mark I, and the 304 Mark II. Unfortunately, running basically the same test every time showed that noise levels generally went down. There were some individual channels that were noisy that went away. That's great. Yeah, so it's just a nice sanity check. There's nothing too crazy going on there. Swath coverage testing. This is a big point of interest for people considering the 304 Mark II upgrade. We have historic coverage data. We were able to do sort of an apples to apples comparison between the 302 in gray and the 304 Mark II colored by depth mode here. We've been getting a lot of questions from ships considering 12 and 30 kilohertz systems and considering the 304 Mark II as an option in deeper water. So there are some benefits here. The benefits seem to be mostly between 1,500 and 3,500 meters depth. And having this chance to do the full test at sea with Kongsberg engineers on board, and like Shannon mentioned, with real-time support via telepresence, it was great. We were able to catch some configuration things, some software level things with the new system, get those addressed very quickly. For instance, Kongsberg increased the coverage limits in their system based on our testing. They added an extra 1,000 meters on each side, which is pretty exciting. So Shannon, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And then I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of what's happened kind of since the sea acceptance testing and some of the variant in use, the Mark II variant in use. So since the sea acceptance testing of the Mark II variant multibeam sonar, the sonar has been put to use during multiple missions, including this 2021 North Atlantic Stepping Stones, New England and Cornerized Seamounts Expedition. This included both ROV and mapping expeditions. And then during this expedition, we actually got to map to some degree 40 seamounts, including 20 that were previously unmapped with any multibeam technology. And then we also performed 14 what we call map and dives, which is where we basically collect the data and turn it over within minutes of deciding where to put the ROV or refining where we're putting the ROV and prior to deployment. And so one of the reasons that we were able to support such this high request for map and dives was that the quality of the data was so good. And in this areas, there was little sound velocity fluctuations and it was pretty deep, but still it was quite impressive to be able to support that level of operations. And just, yeah, the image on this slide shows, our process for planning where to dive, which is the bathymetry, the slope, and the backscatter. And that is next slide. And then this slide shows some of the improvements that was made during that expedition from what was available to the current data collected by the Mark II. Image A shows the comparison between that satellite altimetry data of a seamount, and then on the right is going to be the Mark II variant that was collected during that expedition. And then image B is actually a 2005 C-beam data in comparison to the Mark II. And so it just was really interesting seeing, obviously the difference between the pre-existing data and what we were able to collect with the brand new system. And then all of this data was collected to meet the US and international goals as laid out by that national strategy for mapping, exploring, and characterizing the United States exclusive economic zone, which is that NOMEC strategy, and then the international effort Seabed 2030. So we're excited about this Mark II array and the full complete upgraded system. And we expect this system on the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer will be used to make major contributions to both of those initiatives throughout the next few decades. Next slide. Something else that was pretty exciting was that we did find a shipwreck with the Mark II variant sonar during our annual ROV shakedown expedition. This was the ex-USS Muskellunge. And then 650 meters is really kind of pushing the physical limitations of target detection with the 30 kilohertz sonar. So this was really exciting to see and put this to the test of what the new sonar could do. I do want to mention that this, as a deep water system, is really not a target detection tool. Unfortunately, the shipwreck was on flat terrain with, soft sediment surrounding it. So we were able to detect it with those Mark II backscatter capabilities, but it was good to see. And then just to drive that point home a little bit further, when we surveyed the area in multiple directions, I think 2 directions, and we were really only able to recognize the target in one of those directions, which I found interesting because I've been hammering home for a while the use of deep water multi-beams for target detection. So it helped prove a point, but was still an exciting case. And like I said, I've been kind of working on this and communicating target detection capabilities with deep water multi-beams for a while. And if you're more interested in that, feel free to contact me. And I do have a presentation linked that's an internal presentation in the references slide. This is near and dear to my heart. Next slide. So we do have some exciting upcoming things. For example, we are about to hit 2 million square kilometers mapped with the Okeanos Explorer in just the next couple of days. The ship just left the dock. And then also next field season, we will have some opportunities to expand our work and our testing with the EM304, including being able to test the full achievable coverage when we cross the Puerto Rico Trench. So I know a lot of people will be interested in that. And then also to continue expanding our use of remote and telepresence technologies, including remote watch standing and cloud processing. So we will also continue to work closely with Kongsberg to collaborate on some of the improvements of this system to benefit the broader deep ocean mapping community and industry. And for example, I know they did just improve their bottom detection algorithm from some of the data that we collect while we were in rough seas. And if you want to learn more about those improvements, you can check out Kongsberg US Hydro presentation. I believe once it's available, I'm not sure if those are available yet. Next slide. As I said, I just listed some reference material here as we go through. I know as people are interested in these systems, so we do produce those sea acceptance testing reports that people might find of interest, both for the Mark I and the Mark II, as well as that deep water exploration mapping procedures manual. And we have version 2 forthcoming to be inclusive of more of those cloud processing. I've also linked here a catalog of our living standard operating procedures, which we just reformatted today, or not today, at the beginning of the field season, but it's a link to everything that we do on the Okeanos Explorer, and I think it's already been of use throughout the community. So that might be of interest to you. They are Google documents, so you'll have to request access, but I'll be able to give anyone access who's interested in those SOPs. And that is it. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to contact me or Kevin, or there's also the entire NOAA Ocean Exploration Mapping team that is always ready to take your emails.
And just to follow up quickly, I saw a question from Ethan Roth, I think, and somehow I can't get back to it. But I think the question was, is the 304 just a TRU upgrade if you have a 302? And yes, if you have a 302 and the arrays are in good health, you can do a 304 upgrade with just the transceiver. If you want to go to the Mark II, that is a new transmit array.
And that the big difference there is I think it allows that a broader band frequency there and gets into some lower frequencies, giving you that coverage gain in the deeper waters.
Right.
Yeah, the standard 304 would be I'll talk a little bit. There's a little bit about that in the next presentation.
Great. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing here.
There's an additional question from Rob Sparrick in the chat. How is the EM304 MK2 upgrade in coordination with SBP29?
I haven't particularly tested that system out. We have a Knudsen 3260. So I don't have experience there. I don't know, Kevin, if you do.
Haven't worked with a Mark II 304 and a SBP29, but I'm sure Lee can talk about Sally Ride's SBP29.
Yep, that is in this next, but we haven't done that either. So but the 304, so the SBP29 is advertised to be compatible with either the EM124 or the 304. So you can use either system to make your SBP29 for the RX. And the one announcement to make before I open this presentation is to the Multibeam community section in the for continued questions and discussion in the HUVA website, the meeting website. There's a Multibeam community section where we can keep dialogue going, more questions and comments on this. I did have one comment on the survey. I mean, and I agree that the survey, from what is just super important, but it can be challenging to get buy-in from all stakeholders when a ship is in dry dock, and to get that time. There's so many competing, things going on in timelines, that getting the surveyor access, it's a real lot of it can be done. It's just a lot of coordination.
Yeah, I realize how lucky we were in that case with the Okeanos to do that.
But I think what we're trying to do with things like this is program in the time and to say we need these days, and getting those details in there, or else you can get pushed aside for sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, Shannon.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that it is important, and obviously it's an important thing to the quality of the data, but what is important are the efforts going on now with Mac and Dr. Hiroji from USM to just make it more clear what people are, am I Matt? Okay, I'm not muted. I saw someone's face, like, but to make it more clear what needs to be done to meet the specs of that survey, because I think it's confusing as well. So the more streamlined we get there, the quicker that takes, and the more companies that are available to provide that service. You know, I think Westlake was able to do it in a couple days and things like that. I think it just needs refinement as well to start to be able to do it more frequently.
So I can't emphasize enough how important it is that the survey be an integral piece of the shipyard plan from the get-go. If the success of the shipyard and from the shipyard perspective is dependent on a successful survey up front, you get lots of leverage when it's time to make access and schedule access.
Are you able to see my screen? Do I have this right?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, Dale, I agree. It's yep, it can be a challenge. So I'm Lee Ellett with Scripps Institution for Oceanography. I'm going to present on the sonar installations for so not just the a little bit on the EM124, but a little bit on this SBP29, the physical installation. I'm focusing on the physical installation. A lot of the technicians that were working directly on this, a lot have been at sea. Colby's installing a ADCP today. So that's taken a lot of his time. So given time constraints and operational constraints, I'm focusing on the EM124 upgrade, the SBP29 installation, and a few of the challenges that we've had with Sys5. So Sally Ride went into the dry dock around late April, May this year, and regulatory dry dock, and we had planned in to upgrade the EM124 and install the SBP29. That's that, and this was these hardware upgrades were funded through an ONR DURP. This is and specific to some users that wanted the SBP29, some ONR users that wanted the SBP29 capabilities. I'll talk a little bit about, so start off with the EM124. Like Ethan was asking, what does the upgrade consist of? And that is from the at least the EM122, it was the TRU is upgraded. That's in the center here. If I keep my screen from that center here is the TRU is replaced by the TX unit, and then the preamplifier is replaced by the RX unit, and then you add the processing unit. So that is and both these electronics are a smaller form factor for the TX and the RX. So we were pretty easily able to manage without writing in a lot of cabling into the shipyard package. We were able to get the cable links worked out well to do good cable management for both of these installations. And next, so how this works just in this, so we have the EM124 array, and you have to have an EM124 to get the SBP29. So you have to have that, you have to upgrade to that. And so these are the drawings from Gloston, where this is the spot, where this is the cutout for the SBP29 casing. And then we did not replace, so it's the same array. So the same EM122 array we have with the electronics upgrade is now an EM124. And so it was proposed on this on Sally Ride is putting the SBP29, it's a 3-degree system adjacent to the EM124 TX array. And so it's a significant cutout to the ship, significant modification to the ship to get that in there. And then so the SBP29 is the transmit part, and then you're using the EM124 RX array as your receive for your multi-beam and your receive for your sub-bottom. So you're basically getting some of us have an example one example at the end, a multi-beam sub-bottom profiler. So So the one challenge we knew about going in, and we worked with Gloston on beforehand, and it all worked out, but it was certainly nerve-wracking times, and our technician Keith and Doug did an excellent job of being vigilant with the shipyard. The shipyard was very helpful too. We dropped several of the transducers from the RX array and protected them and got them, you know, at the key times. But as you can see in this picture, the cut for the SBP29 was very close to the 124, but all that worked out. But we had to be very vigilant about that. Another issue that we had was the ABS review. So we had some changes that surprised Gloston a little bit, and these watertight boundaries. So what ABS was saying is they wanted to see a watertight boundary at the top of the casing. So the case, and that's unusual. So the way these normally work with most of the installations with the multi-beam sonars and the academic research fleet is you have your cable conduit going up above the water line, and then you have RVTEC or similar transit box with a vent line going above, going further up, and that has been historically that's been acceptable. But then we were being told that was not going to be acceptable, and you can't, the way these are designed, the casings and the transducer installation, you can't get to this spot at the top of the casing where the cables come out. So it would have been pretty impossible to meet that requirement. So with persistence from Gloston, they got Coast Guard approval and ABS signed. Eventually all got signed off on, but of course that was a process. Next, another challenge that we had is the shipyard specifications. Is these and we go through these things, but it did not explicitly state that the casing would be machined before installation. It was build the casing to these criteria, these dimensions, these tolerances, install the casing. The shipyard chose to build the basic parts of the box, but then not put it on not machine it in a warehouse, in a shop, but to install the casing and then machine it in place. And that was so that worked out, but it was different. So in the future, learn about, be more explicit about how you want, if there's sequences that you can include in that specification, to include it, because it all worked out. It all worked out well, but it was a bit nerve-wracking when the timeline was not exactly what we thought it was going to be. But these, you see with the SBP29 here, this is the 3-degree system is 96 elements, I believe. It's pretty impressive. It's similar in length to the EM124 TX array, but it also it's using they're using a massa variant similar to the sub-bottom profiling, the transducers that we're familiar with the Knudsen echo sounders. And then next we had so due to limited space in the transceiver room, we opted for the underwater CCUs. So these cable connection units. So if you look on this right-hand side where we have a picture of a Happy Colby with the installation, is underneath those plates you see it's it's offset, there's blanking, but that's to accommodate these underwater cable connection units. And those combine the transducers instead of having to do that in the transceiver room. So we're doing it underwater so there's just a few cables that go up the cable transit into the transceiver room. We couldn't have accommodated the whole rack of cable connection units on Sally Ride. But another challenge we had on site during installation was due to a manufacturing error. Each CCU cable had to be individually tested to confirm that there were some factory defects that were, and there were a few of ours that were affected. but we had contracted for KUTI services, so they took care of that. But it was, you know, it was part of the challenge we had during the installation. And next, then wanted to talk a little bit about Sys5. So with all these systems, we had to convert everything to Sys5 for the EM124. The SBP29 uses different software. It does not use Sys. So we had some gridding instability with some compute environments versus a VM versus a bare metal machine. We're still working through some of those. We've not been able to get Sys5 to accept the EM binary format from ICSI Hydrons MRU systems. That's been it. So we're our backup MRUs are no longer backup MRUs. So we're working to resolve that. Our CPAS work fine, I believe. We don't have it on Sally Ride or Roger Vell. We only have CPAth or the ICSI products right now. And we've unable to get Sys5 to reliably accept our Veilport SV sensor. It works with the M124, but not with the 712. We're working to resolve that this port period on Sally Ride. It's the 712 that's been affected now, but we might need to some issues in order to upgrade to 5.7, which I believe is still the current most stable release. Is we've had to go in and remove registry keys, try to get it to do a full, really clean install to get some of the stability, some of the issues to resolve. That's what we're trying right now with this Veilport SV sensor. I got one more slide. Should see the GIF. This is of the SBP29 data. This is the cycling through the beams. So with the multi-beam aspect for the sub-bottom profiling is very powerful. It's pretty cool. You can see as you're going, this is going sweeping port to starboard, and you can see out of plane features. And that was been pretty exciting to the users. So we have a couple users of this system so far, but still a long ways to go, and a lot of training to continue with using all the features. And that is all I have. I'm happy to take any. I see there's some questions in the chat, but I need to stop sharing to get to those. There was a question about process the SBP29 data. So the individual, so you can use for the SBP29 data, you can use the replay, the Kongsberg provided acquisition software as a replay to replay the data. You can use any software to process SegY, but you're processing the SegY for each individual channel. So there's not really software right now. So we've been playing around with it a little bit, but not a lot to do more with it, to deal with the multiple channels. But that's where, I think that's why it's an exciting instrument to a number of users, because there's a new capabilities, new functionality that needs to be figured out with this data. But it can all be read with SegY and the Kongsberg software. So a couple options. That is all I have. Let's see. Next, if there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Kevin to present with Mac.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee. And start sharing my screen here. Hopefully you see a title slide.
Yes.
Yep. So great. Yeah, Lee, it was great to work with you during that sea acceptance trials. That was a busy week and a half at sea with the SBP29 and the new 124. So thanks for your support while we were out there. So I'm Kevin Jerram with the Multibeam Advisory Committee, presenting some lessons learned and activities from the last year and a little overview of what we do. I work with Paul Johnson and Vicky Farini. You may know them. They are also tuning in here so they can answer questions while I'm talking. I'm going to move a little quickly. Some of this you might have heard before, but we're funded by the NSF to provide any multi-beam mapping system support to the UNOLS fleet. And I want to say a big thank you to Jim, if he's out there. We're currently in a 5-year grant. The first year was 2011, so we're actually wrapping up the first 10 years here. And our goals are to standardize testing across the fleet, publish reports and best practices, and host additional resources from outside the UNOLS fleet. So if there's anything out there that other ships and other platforms are doing that's useful, we'll certainly take that and try to share that. And again, we provide onboard support and also, especially in the last couple of years, remote support. We have an email help desk, machelp@unols.org, and Vicky's putting together a new website for us, which is coming together really nicely. Quick overview of the mapping systems in the US academic fleet. There are 12 vessels with 15 Kongsberg systems and 2 Rezon systems. Lots of other sensors and configurations and histories of those setups, and vessel working areas near the host institutions. So we take all that into consideration when we're planning MAC support. The RCRVs are on the way. We'll definitely be involved with the sea acceptance testing for those. We focus pretty heavily on Kongsberg hardware and software because that is the vast majority of the vessels and the systems out there. We try to provide support across the full range of life cycles. Some of them are brand new, some of them are approaching end of life. Here's a quick overview of the different types of support we provided to the different ships since the MAC was founded. And the stars indicate cases where we've provided remote support for a certain kind of test. This also lists the ages of the arrays or when they were installed. So there may be some systems out there that we should start thinking about array degradation and replacement. Our approach here is to, again, try to standardize the testing methods. We try to develop a checklist for activities that are prioritized based on the impact on data quality and fit into the often narrow time windows that are allotted for sea acceptance testing or quality assurance testing. And in this example here, this is actually from the Ravel. You can see it turns into a central resource with links to waypoints and settings and survey information, some of the assessment tools. We try to make it a collaborative approach. The earlier, the better. If we can get involved weeks or months ahead of your expected time window, that is usually for the better. And here's an example of typical testing if we had all the time in the world to do it. These again are listed in order of priority, starting with the vessel geometry and the configuration of the mapping sensors. Once that's sorted out, we work on calibration like a patch test. We do some receiver noise testing, swath accuracy and coverage testing, looking for anything that's limiting the performance, the expected performance of the system. We have ways of looking at built-in self-tests as a proxy for hardware health. They're not a direct measurement of impedance. And so that's a secondary way of looking at hardware health over the life cycle. We try to look at water column data quality just generally. And there are certainly more advanced ways to look at that, but we like to just make sure you can see a known methane seep or something like that, or stratified layers in the water column. I mentioned during the talk with Shannon that we also want to start prioritizing backscatter normalization. It does come to the end of the list right here because it is a lot of time. It's also something that can be done opportunistically on your transits, but it's going to be more important for systems as time goes on. And then we try to standardize reporting. That always takes more time than we would like to admit. But in the background here, you can see an example of one case where we were able to make a very dense test plan in a relatively confined working area. So that saves transit time and makes the most of our ship time. That can also be stretched out. So if you are on a big transit, we can break it up. So again, harping on the vessel offset survey reports, we just want to stress that this is fundamental to data quality. When we have data quality issues, not every time, but more often than not, we can trace it back to something in a configuration, and sometimes those configuration errors end up being traced back to an ambiguous survey report. Sometimes, most of the time, the numbers themselves are good, but the way they're reported is a little bit unclear. And so when you take that report and you try to translate it into a POSMV or multi-beam configuration, that tends to be where the little error slips in. So we provide recommendations for surveyors. It's just a relatively simple set of guidelines. You can hand this document to your surveyor, at least start a discussion with them about what your ship really needs out of that report. And of course, we're available with our help desk. We'd love to talk about any vessel survey stuff you have coming up, or vessel geometry review. Make sure things are making sense. Do a little sanity check there. We also have a series of assessment tools that are in development, but we try to use these tools to make sure the way we're processing the data is roughly the same, so we can make apples to apples comparisons and give us a little bit more flexibility than some of the commercial tools out there for very specific types of plots we want to make. So we have a file trimmer that we use to increase the speed of ship to shore transfer if we're doing remote support. That is .all file only right now. Still working on the KML format. It's fundamentally different, so we can't strip out some of the things that we can with a .all. We have a BISC plotter, again, for looking at proxies for hardware health and noise assessments, so we can catch changes in the vessel noise profile earlier. Same thing with coverage plotters. So I showed that with Shannon's presentation, comparing historic coverage plots to new data, looking for any signs of changes there or improvements if you've made some changes in hardware or fixed a noise issue on board or cleaned the hull. It's amazing what can make a difference there. That also goes into survey planning. So if you have a scientist coming on board, they know they want to cover a certain area, but they don't have much history with your system, you can show them how much coverage they might expect. We have an accuracy plotter that helps us look at swath performance in varieties of modes relative to a trusted bathymetric surface. So again, these are in continuous development. And since last time we talked, we worked with 6 vessels, mostly remotely, of course, and mostly using proven test sites that we've visited in the past. In this case, we had sea acceptance trials for the Atlantis EM124 and CPATH, and the Sally Ride also got a 124 upgrade. So thank you, first and foremost, to all the technicians and managers for making that possible to do this remotely. It's a relatively new option, and it's made a big difference, I think, for us working through the pandemic, and in some cases being able to support ships with overlapping schedules where we wouldn't have been able to be on board multiple ships at once. So we've also made some improvements to the assessment tools since last time. We talked with KML support in some of the tools, not the file trimmer, but the rest of them. And then lots more filtering options and some little tweaks that as new data formats come in, with what Lee said about Sys5, the formats change. We've also been involved in some non-MAC projects that we kind of try to fold back into the MAC approach, and that is working with some autonomous platforms such as the Sail Drone and the DRIX, and then exploration vessels like Okeanos and Nautilus, Falcor. And so when we work with those other vessels, we get hands-on experience with new equipment, and we get to develop new test sites. So those can be used, or at least referenced in some of the MAC work. So some of the lessons learned or things that stand out for us in the last year, as a general theme, the common sites and the common assessment tools are becoming more valuable. It's easier to plan these tests. We can make more meaningful apples to apples comparisons for a given system over its history, or maybe, for example, comparing systems across ships at the same site. Here we have some examples of swath accuracy data with different synchronization schemes on board over a reference site that's been reused many times. And then on the right, we have noise trends for the same system, but on same model, but on two different ships. So you can see one ship might make a little bit of a different decision about their mapping speed compared to the other based on the noise trends. On a related topic, aside from the proven sites and the common assessments tools, we're seeing a lot of value in the transit data. So this is on a big picture. This goes into the global grids, and this is important for global mapping efforts. On a ship level, it can help you catch problems early. The places where you can send the data, R2R, GMRT, they provide other assessment options that will help you see how well your system's doing and look at achieved coverage and some other tools like that. I've already mentioned the survey reports, but as a lesson learned from the last year, this is still a source of a challenge for us. And just the other week, I was reviewing a report and realized there was a typo in the transmit array pitch for a certain system, and this was compensated by the patch test result. So it's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal. And so we'll address this on the next quality assessment test of that system. I definitely take responsibility for missing that typo, but I think it's also fair to say that if the survey report used the format that the manufacturers use in their sign convention and access convention, it would at least be easier to catch these things. I'm not saying that the survey report is wrong, because it isn't. It's correct, but catching those typos might be a little bit easier. So again, we have guidelines that we recommend you just hand to your surveyor, and we're always available for that discussion. Growing interest in Backscatter, again, mentioned this with Okeanos. Very valuable tool for monitoring changes in your array responses. There are just some hardware level biases that you can't address in post-processing. So the earlier you can do this in the life cycle, the better, but it should be done at any point in the life cycle, because it'll improve your Backscatter products, and scientists coming on board may have a very specific desire for that. And a ship that has their Backscatter sorted out that's gonna be a very valuable product. One other point here is that I've talked about our collaborative approach, and we try to make the multi-beam testing fit as easily as possible into the existing ship working grounds, the transit plans, around other activities that the ship has. And that's what we want to do. We want to work with the ship with as much time in advance as possible. But there are limits to how flexible some of those plans can be because we have proven sites that are valuable. We have a good idea that they work well for accuracy testing or patch test. And so using those sites, even if they're a little bit out of the way, can pay off. So what I like to think about is these MAC activities or recommendations, they can be dovetailed into the ship plan, but they can't always be replaced by other activities. Finally, the high-speed data connections continue to be just invaluable for remote support. We really appreciate the tech's willingness to try new ways of sharing data and communicating, because obviously email gets cumbersome. There's still no substitute for being on board. We had a great time on Sally Ride with the hot dog eating contest and line dancing. So thank you for making that happen and getting us out there safely, following protocols. Next steps, we want to help ships improve their transit data. Again, big picture, this goes into the global grids, the USEEZ, GMRT. It's a Seabed 2030 and UN Ocean Decade sort of effort. But on your ship level and what you might care about more directly or more immediately is that it's opportunistic testing. You can catch problems early. In this case, in the swath coverage example, we figured out that some of the runtime parameters were not set, or they were limiting the coverage unnecessarily. And for instance, here in the seabed artifact image down here, you can see that we were able to test some runtime parameters and fix a specific kind of acoustic penetration problem with just some transit data. So we want to hear from you about your top challenges or roadblocks. Feel free to email us or chat with us here. And we want to know if you have any ideas for resources or tools that would help you improve your transit mapping efforts at sea. Next, again, RCRVs are in progress. We want to work with the Healy on their 122 replacement. Any other late life cycle systems, we want to be involved. So please reach out. Let us know if you have plans or questions. We'd be happy to talk.
Hi, Kevin, real quick. We have to end the session 5 minutes to the hour so that we can start the next session. So
Okay.
if you could get into wrap up mode. And again, there is the Multibeam community tab to continue this discussion and if anybody has questions.
Okay, this is the last slide. Talking with the Tech Training Committee, Kate Kuba, we want to put together some more community resources, and we'll be doing a What Went Wrong Wednesday over the winter. So get your questions ready for that. So thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Great presentation. Always good working with the MAC. And I think, as Brandy says, we'll go ahead and end this session. Next, we have it'll be the pools and resources 2, starting at noon in a different off the agenda in the app. So thank you, everyone. See you in a few minutes.
Thank you.